On the historical evening of August 21st, 1986, Lake Nyos erupted in Cameroon. The lake, which was located in the crater of a dormant volcano, released a tremendous cloud of cold carbon dioxide gas during that night, which quietly raced down the hill and killed practically everything below. That evening, Lake Nyos spilled around a quarter of a cubic mile of carbon dioxide, which was moving downhill at close to 45 miles an hour. About 1,746 people died in nearby villages, most of them as they slept. The village of Nyos itself saw the death of almost every soul. It was a brutal death that sent chilly sensations down the spines of everyone who heard about it. The Nyos event didn't take place 1,000 or even 100 years ago, in contrast to numerous volcanic disasters. When it happened in 1986, scientists were able to visit the location quickly. As a result, we have a thorough account of what happened at Lake Nyos that is both terrifying and horrific. The condition that the disaster's few survivors must have awakened to must have gone beyond dread into the profoundly bizarre. Some of the survivors didn't wake for 2 days, and when they did, they were met with the horrifying discovery that all of their neighbors, their family members, they were dead. They may be forgiven for thinking that the world had ended when they stumbled out of their homes, and that some unearthly power had befallen them. There was nothing alive anymore. In the streets, there were birds found dead. In the fields, there were cattle found dead. Just carcasses littered the streets. Rescue personnel who came later saw the calm and lack of the insectile clamor that is typical of tropical Africa, since even the insects were dead. It took a few days before insect life returned, and at the time, the vultures that had traveled from nearby locations to feast on the remains also arrived. In actuality, it was downright horrifying. The disaster's origin wasn't immediately known. Everything was normal, save from the corpses. The sun, it shone brightly, green covered the fields, no structures were torn down. There was no burning. At first, some believed that there was a deadly pandemic that only few with innate immunity would survive. However, none of the foreigners and government representatives who gradually entered the settlements became sick. So, it was soon obvious that there was another factor involved, and that factor turned out to be carbon dioxide. Understanding how carbon dioxide dissolves in water is essential to comprehending the Lake Nyos eruption. Every gas has a fixed level of solubility in water, over which no further gas might be introduced. At atmospheric pressure and temperature, the limit for carbon dioxide is about 1 liter of the gas per liter of water. Additional efforts to bubble gas into the water or add additional gas to the water is going to be ineffective. Each bubble will continue to contain the same amount of gas as it rises and eventually leaves the surface. By raising the pressure or lowering the temperature, a gas becomes more soluble in water. And the bottom of a deep lake is precisely where one finds high pressure and low temperature. Nyos is relatively deep. Like many crater lakes, its bottom is almost 2 football fields long and 682 feet below the surface. The solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 times greater at this depth due to the extreme pressure, which is 20 times more than that at the surface. At atmospheric pressure, water can store 1 liter of carbon dioxide per liter of liquid, as mentioned, meaning that at the bottom of Nyos, 1 liter of water might store an incredible 20 liters of carbon dioxide. That's, I probably don't need to tell you, a lot of carbon dioxide. And because almost no light can reach the bottom of Nyos, it's approximately 700 feet below the surface. It's also very cold, possibly dissolving even more carbon dioxide. However, just because a lake is capable of holding a lot of carbon dioxide gas doesn't guarantee that it would really hold it. This carbon dioxide's gotta come from somewhere, and for most lakes, that somewhere is the air near the lake's surface. Because there's no efficient route for surface carbon dioxide to flow down to the bottom, most deep lakes have a high potential to dissolve carbon at depth. But the actual quantity of dissolved carbon dioxide is consistently fairly low. The carbon dioxide in Lake Nyos, however, did not originate from the surface. While long inactive, there is still some volcanic activity that produces carbon dioxide deep under the surface of Lake Nyos. The gas is introduced exactly where its solubility is maximum, as it seeps up via fissures and crevices in the rock, eventually rising up to the lake bottom. Imagine these bubbles of carbon dioxide rising from Lake Nyos' bottom. As they ascend, they come into contact with very cold, highly pressurized, and carbon dioxide-starved water. So if you were at the bottom of Lake Nyos and could somehow see through these gloomy depths, you might witness a plume of bubbles shooting upwards from a break in the floor, and growing smaller and smaller as they climbed, the gases dissolving in the water until the bubbles just vanished. Imagine yourself on the bottom of Lake Nyos, surrounded by countless columns of bubbles ascending higher and higher and eventually vanishing, much like the steam above your coffee cup that rises through the air above and finally dissipates. The horrifying thought that with each bubble that disintegrated, the lake would get further to catastrophe that would make it extremely exciting to watch these bubbles vanish. The water would be edging ever closer to tragedy as each bubble dissipated. Carbon dioxide might dissolve into deep, cold water for a very long time, possibly 100 years, during which nothing unpleasant might occur. But the lake will gradually become unstable. The possibility for tragedy grows year after year, decades after decade, as a result of the ongoing breakdown. Let's assume that we're at the bottom of Lake Nyos once again, but this time we've got a bottle with us. The water will fiercely effervesce, foaming explosively out of the container. If we were to fill that bottle with water from the bottom, seal it, bring it to the surface, and then open it. That's due to the fact that, at the much lower pressure at the lake's top, water that is already saturated at the pressures found at the Nyos' bottom becomes hypersaturated. When unexpectedly exposed to the lower pressure at the lake's surface, the carbon dioxide in the water at the lake's bottom desires to be in gas form, which causes the water to rapidly degas in a similar fashion to how a soda bottle might effervesce when opened. What if something else caused Lake Nyos to become unstable, leading part of the lake's deep water to rise into the warmer, lower pressure layers of the lake, instead of someone diving into the lake's bottom and bringing the bottom water to the surface? If this were to occur, bubbles made of dissolved carbon dioxide would be released from the upwelling water. And although that seems mild, this would be catastrophic. Nobody's really clear why the bottom water in Lake Nyos began to rise. Now, some have proposed that the source was a minor seismic vibration, while others have suggested that it was a perfectly timed wind-induced churning of the lake's water. Others have suggested that the reason might have been underwater landslides or steam explosions under the lake's bottom, both of which are common in the crater lakes, even in inactive volcanoes. Whatever the reason, during the night of August 21st, 1986, some of the cold water from Lake Nyos' depths rose higher. And as soon as this first disruption happened, tragedy was mere moments away. The pressure of the frigid lake water fell as it rose, and its temperatures rose when it met the warmer water dwelling above it, and as a result, several carbon dioxide bubbles emerged from the solution. Now, on their own, this wouldn't have caused a catastrophe. However, as they climbed, the bubbles entrained some of the liquids below, which, as it rose, became supersaturated and burst into bubbles. These bubbles attracted more deep water, creating further bubbles. Thus, a feedback loop developed, in which each bubble caused the emergence of further bubbles, which in turn produced new ones. Self-reinforcing processes, positive feedback loops, exponential growth, and other terms are all used to describe such processes. Explosion is also another name for this kind of process. Massive amounts of carbon dioxide suddenly came out of solution as the cold, saturated water that had slept contentedly down at the bottom of Lake Nyos for countless years surged to the surface at an explosive pace. The gas emission was silent, although incredibly fatal. The only sound that the survivors could describe was a rumble, which they described as sounding like a distant explosion or a rock slide. Most likely, nobody heard anything at all. 1,746 people died. According to the United Nations, 3,500 people were forced to flee their homes. 300 ended up in hospitals, and 3,500 herds of livestock were wiped out. There were 4 survivors in the entire town of Nyos. Some of the dead were discovered in settlements up to 12 miles away from the lake, with dead livestock being discovered at altitudes of up to 330 feet above the crater rim. That's just to give you an idea of just the sheer amount of gas that was pushed out. It's a miracle that anybody survived. Maybe the peculiarities of the wind and air movement allowed some people to have just enough oxygen to live. It's possible that some people lived in houses with poor ventilation to prevent the carbon dioxide from entering. Perhaps the survivors were at a high spot in their house where, like a person caught in a sinking vehicle, a bubble of air kept them alive until the carbon dioxide dispersed. In an effort to avoid another disaster, Lake Nyos is now the subject of ongoing research, and a degassing plan has been put into place. Other crater lakes do exist in Cameroon. However, there are thought to be 44 of these in the northwest province of Cameroon alone, where carbon dioxide might be accumulating deep below. In 1984, a similar explosion in Lake Maunon, also in Cameroon, resulted in the deaths of 34 persons. Future carbon dioxide lake explosions in Cameroon are unknown, as are the possibility that similar circumstances might occur in crater lakes elsewhere in the globe.